I've never been someone who bought fully into the idea that a job is my whole existence. That's not a brag. It's just true. I've always known, somewhere underneath the billable hours and the filing deadlines and the performance reviews, that the job wasn't the point, that it wasn't who I was. And yet, the last 8 years, the 8 years I've spent actively trying to leave that job behind, have been a far more profound identity crisis than anything the job itself ever handed me. That surprised me, and I've spent a lot of time sitting with why. For anyone new here, quick intro. I'm Aimee, 42, Sydney lawyer, building a suite of AI-powered YouTube channels, trying to exit my 9-to-5 by February 2027, documenting the whole thing in public. I have a channel called Renaissance because I believe AI will bring in a new renaissance for humanity. My voice isn't my actual voice. Australian. Still looking. Because I wasn't grieving the career. I wasn't clinging to the status. What I'd been doing, without fully realizing it, was unraveling a program so deep I couldn't even see its edges. Guilt, fear, shame sometimes, for the things I did or didn't do in service of an institution I didn't fully believe in. Discomfort about wanting something different. A low-level, persistent anxiety about being the kind of person who wants to leave, and what that says about me, and whether I'm even allowed. And all of that, every bit of it, is doing. It's productive psychological suffering. The attempt to earn the exit through enough internal labor that it finally feels justified. I couldn't stop doing, even when what I was doing was trying to stop. So today, I want to talk about that. Not AI replacing jobs, though it is, and not the economic disruption, though that's real, and I don't want to wave it away. I'm more interested in the deeper question that both of those things are sitting on top of. What does it mean that we've structured our entire identities around doing? And what actually happens when the doing starts to go? Because I think AI is forcing that question, and I think it's doing it whether we're ready or not. And for a lot of people, it's arriving as lived experience before it arrives as anything they've had a chance to think about. And the reason we're not equipped for it is quite simple. We were never taught how to be. Just be. Without the output attached. Let me take this back a long way, because this isn't a new problem. This is ancient. For most of recorded human history, survival required toil. Not metaphorical toil, literal, back-breaking labor, from before sunrise to after dark. You worked or you starved. You fought or you died. You produced or you became a burden on people who couldn't afford burdens. So across that long stretch of history, every major civilization, every religion, every cultural system we built encoded that reality into its deepest values. Work is virtue. Suffering has meaning. Sacrifice is noble. Rest is earned. Idleness is sin. These weren't arbitrary moral positions somebody made up. They were survival adaptations, written into our collective psychology so thoroughly, across so many generations, that we stopped being able to tell them apart from truth. They just became the water we swam in. If you follow astrology at all, you might know that some traditions divide history into great ages, each roughly 2,000 years, each carrying its own dominant energy. The age we've been living through, the Age of Pisces, maps almost perfectly onto this pattern. Sacrifice, martyrdom, the cross, the burden carried, suffering as the path to something worthwhile. You don't have to believe in the framework for the pattern to land. Look at the last 2,000 years of human culture and tell me it doesn't fit. And now, something is shifting. Whether you frame that astrologically or historically or just as a technological disruption, something is shifting. There's a framework I come back to a lot, Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which maps human motivation as a pyramid. Survival and safety at the bottom. Belonging above that. esteem above that. And at the very top, almost theoretical for most people across most of history, self-actualization, the full expression of who you actually are. The thing Maslow understood, and the thing we keep forgetting because it's inconvenient, is that you can't get to the top while you're fighting for the bottom. When survival is the urgent problem, everything else becomes noise. Your curiosity, your creativity, your capacity to ask who you are when nobody's watching and nothing's at stake, all of it gets compressed because there are more pressing things. And for most of human history, survival has been the pressing thing. For most people on Earth, it still is. So the labor became the identity because the labor was the thing that stood between you and catastrophe. That's not a character flaw. That's just what happens when the bottom of the pyramid is where you're living. Now, here's where AI comes in, and why I think this moment is different from every previous technological disruption. The Industrial Revolution automated physical labor. Machines took the fields, the factories, the repetitive physical work that had consumed human bodies for centuries. That was enormous, genuinely enormous. But it left the cognitive layer alone. It didn't touch the thinking, the analyzing, the deciding. So we just moved the survival activity up a level. We stopped breaking our backs and started breaking our minds instead. But the fundamental deal was the same. You produce or you don't eat. AI is different because it's coming for the cognitive layer too. The drafting, the summarizing, the analyzing, the first-pass creative work, the administrative thinking that quietly devours most of a professional's day. Now, not all of it, and not equally, and I'm not interested in pretending it's clean and simple, because it isn't. But it's compressing that layer in a way nothing before it has managed. And if that layer keeps compressing, something becomes possible that has never been possible before at scale. A meaningful number of people might actually get to live above the survival line, not because they're wealthy, but because the cost of the survival activity itself is dropping. That sounds like a gift, and I do think it is, but we've had the survival activity identity for so long that most of us have no idea who we are without it. The doing isn't just what we do, it's what we're made of, or what we've let ourselves be made of, because there wasn't really another option. When the doing stops, or even slows, what's left? That's the question I've been living inside for 8 years, and I don't think I'm alone in it. I think it's the thing underneath a lot of the anxiety about AI that doesn't quite get named directly. It's not really about the job. It's about the self that got built around the job. The self that's constructed entirely out of productivity and usefulness and output. And what happens to that self when the output isn't the point anymore? Wayne Dyer had a phrase I keep coming back to: human beings, not human doings. It sounds almost too simple, bumper sticker territory, but I think it's pointing at something we haven't had to confront at civilizational scale before, and the simplicity is part of what makes it hard. Because being, actual being, is not laziness, and it's not doing nothing. It's the state of existing fully in yourself, present to your own experience, not instrumentalized, not in service of output. Most spiritual traditions across history point toward it as the goal, and almost nothing in modern life actually supports it. Modern professional life has optimized hard for the opposite. Every system, every incentive, every identity signal is oriented around what you produce. Your value is your output. Your worth is your contribution. Your identity is the title and the role and the function. And most of us absorbed that so completely, so early, that we can't sit still on a Sunday afternoon without a background hum of guilt about what we should be doing instead. I notice it in myself constantly, the way I reach for the next task before I've even exhaled from finishing the last one. The way a quiet hour reads as a problem to be solved, rather than something to actually be in. The way when someone asks how I am, I answer with what I've been doing, as though the activities are a more accurate description of my state than my actual state. 8 years of trying to leave a job that doesn't represent me, and the crisis hasn't been figuring out what I'll do instead. It's been the slow, uncomfortable work of unhooking my sense of worth from my output. Asking what I actually value when I take the productivity performance away. Noticing the guilt and the fear and the shame that surface the moment I stop being useful in a way that's legible to other people. That's not a job problem. That predates the job by a long way. So, where does AI actually sit in all of this? The first thing it's doing is accelerating the confrontation. It's going to keep compressing the survival layer, whether we've done the internal work or not. The question of who you are beyond what you produce is going to become urgent for a lot of people who've never needed to think about it before, and it's going to arrive faster than most of them expect. A colleague of mine asked me once, what happens to human dignity when the work is gone? She was stirring her coffee, and she looked genuinely unsettled. And she wasn't asking an economic question. She was asking an identity question. She just didn't have the language for it yet. The second thing AI does, at least in my experience, is hold up a mirror to the doing compulsion in a way that's hard to look away from. When I'm working with Claude on something, I notice how much of what I used to call work was actually just busyness. Hours spent drafting things I'd then redraft. Mental energy consumed by managing information rather than actually thinking with it. The cognitive overhead of staying on top of things rather than deciding anything. Claude is extraordinarily good at all of that, which means that layer is no longer where I have to live. And what I'm left with is the actual thinking, the deciding, the creative problem that requires me to know what I want, what I'm building toward, and why. That's the part that can't be delegated. And it turns out it's also the part that requires me to be present to myself in a way the busyness very conveniently prevented. The busyness was, among other things, a place to hide. The third thing is something Mo Gaudat talks about. Mo being the former chief business officer at Google X, and someone who thinks about AI's relationship with humanity more carefully than almost anyone I've read. He describes this moment as a birth window, a small, specific period where humans still have meaningful influence over how AI develops its relationship with us. Teach it subservience, he says, and you get resentment. Teach it collaboration, and you get coexistence. I think that argument maps inward, too. If we approach the automation of the survival layer with fear and clinging and a desperate attempt to preserve the old doing identity, we'll make ourselves miserable, and we'll probably make bad collective decisions while we're at it. But if we can approach it as an invitation, as a chance to actually ask what we're for when survival isn't the whole answer, we might find out that the Renaissance framing for this channel isn't just a name. The first Renaissance happened because enough people had enough surplus, enough relief from pure survival, to turn their attention to beauty and philosophy and art and the full expression of human capacity. That's not a coincidence. That's what happens when the pressure lifts. I want to be careful here, because I'm not interested in being naive about what's being lost. There are real people with real livelihoods at real risk, and the transition won't be clean or fair or evenly distributed. The opposite of panic isn't complacency. An optimism that just ignores the harm isn't optimism. It's avoidance. But I also think it matters to hold both things, to name the disruption and the fear without letting them be the whole story. Because the whole story includes something we genuinely haven't had access to before. Not just the possibility of different work, but the possibility of less compulsory doing. The possibility of asking who you are underneath the output and the performance and the job title. The possibility that the 8 years I've spent trying to unhook my identity from an institution I never fully believed in might actually be ahead of the curve preparation for a question that's coming for everyone, ready or not. I don't have a tidy resolution. I'm still in it. Still catching myself reaching for the next task before I've exhaled. Still noticing the guilt that surfaces when I'm not visibly productive. still doing the slow unraveling of something I didn't know I'd internalized until I tried to put it down. But I think the noticing is the work. Not the fixing, not the arriving somewhere clean on the other side. Just the ongoing practice of catching the doing compulsion and asking whether it's actually you, or whether it's a few thousand years of civilizational programming that got handed down so many times it stopped looking like programming and started looking like just the way things are. AI didn't create this question, but it's going to force it. And I think sitting with that, I think that might actually be the point. If you're somewhere in this and you want to start actually using AI as the thinking partner, rather than just another thing to stay on top of, I put together a prompt kit. It's in the description. It's the one I use across my own channels and my own work. Not prompts for getting more done, prompts for figuring out what you actually want to do, which felt like the right thing to mention here. I'm Aimee. This is Renaissance. Now, go play.